Prologue. Stone, a member of the clan of bastards, undergoes a brutal initiation, marking his arm with the gang's name. Despite the gang's rough exterior, he feels a sense of belonging after joining. Queen Clarice, the gang leader, plans a heist on a Marlock warehouse, but some members, like Coins, express hesitation due to the dangerous reputation of the river yard, where people have gone missing. Amid preparations, Revocators attack, killing several members of the gang. Stone and Coins flee through the building, with Stone ultimately leaving Coins behind to escape the oncoming threat. Stone narrowly avoids capture, hiding in a warehouse where he encounters the infamous Ghost, a butcher who kills his victims. Just as the Ghost prepares to kill him, a Drake appears and kills the Ghost, offering Stone shelter at the Mount. Stone is left with the question of where he truly belongs. Part 1. The Spider and the Worm. In Chapter 1, Rosamund, disguised and on the run, travels with a small group of loyal warriors from the Titan Guard, who once protected her brother, Emperor Sulliver. They are journeying to Wyke, hoping to regroup and plan a rebellion against the Ministry. Rosamund struggles with guilt over the loss of her brother and the uncertainty of leading these men, who are now under her command. She finds solace in their loyalty, particularly in Ianto Frey, a young warrior with tactical training. As they set camp, tensions rise when Rosamund learns that the city of Wyke has fallen to the Ministry, leaving her with fewer options. A scout named Fiza delivers the news, confirming that the city is now under Ministry control. Despite the setback, Rosamund refuses to give in, vowing to continue her fight and lead her remaining forces to Wyke. She resolves to rest and prepare for the challenges ahead. In Chapter 2, Tyretta arrives at the port of Candlehope, where tensions run high after the Ministry's rise to power. She carefully plans her movements with Kren and Kat, aware of the dangers. The port seems abandoned, and Tyretta fears her mother, Lady Rosamond, may already be a prisoner of the Ministry. As they make their way into the city, they encounter a nervous sentry who recognizes Tyretta and lets them through. Inside the Hawkspur depot, Tyretta finds the staff preparing to leave due to the presence of an Armiger battalion. The lieutenant, Stadiana Walden, reveals that Tyretta's brother Connell may have perished in a recent shipwreck, though his fate is uncertain. Stead offers Tyretta transportation north to Wyke, where Tyretta hopes to find her mother. As they leave the city, Tyretta's resolve hardens, but the uncertainty surrounding her brother's death lingers. In Chapter 3, Connell is bound and escorted through Argon Kine by two intimidating figures, Tulson and Broad Yon. He tries to bargain for his release, claiming his value as the heir to the Hawkspur Guild, but is ignored and silenced with a gag. Connell is brought to a slave auction, where he is sold to the highest bidder despite his desperate pleas. His potential buyers, Uctra and an elderly woman, bid over him, but ultimately, a man from Arcturus wins him with a bid of 100 ounces of silver. Connell is thrown into a cage with other slaves, including a burly man, a woman, and two vagabonds. As night falls, the group is led away by hooded warriors to meet Bainra Mokhtar, their new master from Arcturus. Connell is placed in a caged wagon for the journey, realizing that this route may bring him closer to home, but he must survive the journey and figure out a way to escape. In Chapter 4, Lancelin travels through the Alderwood toward the Forge, reflecting on the grief of Fulren's death and his commitment to Rosamund's cause. He arrives at the Seminarium, a military academy where he was once trained, and finds it abandoned. Entering the building, he encounters his former instructor, Cassian Maine, who has stayed behind while others left due to the current unrest. Lancelin and Cassian share a tense conversation about the fall of the guilds and the Ministry's rise, with Lancelin urging Cassian to join him in fighting back. They spar briefly, with Lancelin proving his skill and growth since their last meeting. After the fight, Cassian reveals that he will support Lancelin, pledging his loyalty to the cause. The chapter ends with Lancelin preparing to continue his journey, now with Cassian at his side. In Chapter 5, Kara arrives in the Web at midnight, reflecting on the decay of the city and her family's fall from grace. She travels with Olger Vine and Hessa Fortuna, her loyal Webwainers, to her father's dilapidated estate. Upon entering, Kara encounters the new steward, who informs her that her father, Lord Engelram, only wishes to see her. The two have a tense reunion, with Kara reporting the success of her efforts, overthrowing the guilds and securing victory for the Hallow Hills. However, her father dismisses her achievements, expressing disdain for the current state of the Hallow Hills and their dependence on the Draconate. He demands that she secure more power for the guild, offering her 2 precious daggers as a gift. Despite the tension, Kira takes the daggers and prepares to return to the anvil, knowing that her father's influence will always loom over her actions. In Chapter 6, Connell wakes up in a cage on a cart heading to Arcturus. He shares the cage with other prisoners, including Ramison, a former fighter, and a silent woman, Nylia. Connell learns that his captor, Bainra Mokhtar, works for the scion Senmanthus, and while Connell tries to convince Bainra of his value, he is told that Bainra cannot betray Senmanthus for riches. Upon arrival at a quarry, Connell is confronted by Orsican, a brutal warrior who orders the slaves to march. When Connell speaks out, Orsican nearly kills him but is stopped by Bainra, who takes him aside. Bainra reveals that he was sent to find Connell because Senmanthus already knows his worth. As night falls, Connell shares a meal with Nylia, who reveals that she too ended up in this predicament by mistake. Connell lies down to rest, preparing for the long journey ahead. In Chapter 7, Rosamund's journey north is marked by the harsh cold and uncertainty. Her forces are growing, but it is clear they lack the strength to take back Wyke, which is heavily occupied by the Ursus Battalion. She learns from her scout, Fiza, that the city's defenses are strong, and while some refugees have joined her, it's not enough. Rosamund struggles with doubt and grief, but she resolves to act, despite the odds. She plans to infiltrate Wyke, hoping to rally the people there to rise up against the battalion. Ianto, her advisor, urges caution, but Rosamund insists on moving forward. News arrives from a scout about her family, and she learns of Connell's fate, though the scout is ambushed before he can speak freely. Rosamund narrowly escapes an assassination attempt by 3 assassins sent by her nephew Ingilram. In the chaos, she is reunited with her daughter, Tiretta, who has changed significantly since their last meeting. In Chapter 8, Tiretta and her mother, Lady Rosamund, reunite, but their relationship is strained by the challenges they face. The camp they are in is poorly equipped, and Tiretta realizes that they are vastly outnumbered and unprepared for the war ahead. After hearing the news of Connell's death, Tiretta vows to seek revenge on those responsible. Rosamund, while appearing emotionally distant, confirms the danger they face from Ingilram Hollowhill and agrees to send Tiretta to find the artificer Nikos Marigot in Windstone, whose research could potentially turn the tide of the war. Tiretta insists on taking the mission herself, and despite Rosamund's objections, she is allowed to go with a small group, including Donan instead. As Tiretta prepares to leave, her mother, emotionally fragile, pleads for her to be careful and promises to stay behind. Tiretta leaves, feeling the weight of her promise. In Chapter 9, Ansel, a servant of the Draconate, reflects on the guilt he carries from executing key figures under the Archlegate's orders, including the former Archlegate, Gilbard, and the Emperor. His internal struggle deepens, particularly after his role in the assassination of Fulren Hawkspur, which he views as a personal failure. Ansel contemplates his life as a bodyguard, enduring humiliations like witnessing Sancton's indulgent and hypocritical behavior. When a young girl, Grace, approaches him with concern, Ansel struggles with his discomfort around her innocence. Sancton's victory is celebrated, and Ansel, though part of the Archlegate's rise, feels disconnected from the piety his master projects. The chapter closes with Ansel in his private chamber, haunted by guilt. Despite his position, he finds no solace in faith or sanctity, resorting to self-inflicted punishment with a scourge to cope with his overwhelming shame. In Chapter 10, Connell struggles through the harsh desert landscape, desperately trying to keep moving under the watchful eyes of the captors. As he reaches Arcturus, he is greeted by its ominous gates and the foreboding statue of a demon. Once inside, the prisoners are given water before being forced into an arena for a deadly trial. Connell faces Ramison, a seasoned gladiator, and despite Ramison's offer for a quick death, Connell refuses. After a grueling fight, Connell manages to wound Ramison, but when the war maven Orsican orders the final blow, Connell refuses to kill his opponent. Orsican intervenes, killing Ramison instead and threatening Connell. Exhausted and defeated, Connell is dragged into a dark room with other surviving prisoners, including Nylia. As the sounds of death echo around them, Connell realizes that survival has come at a terrible cost. In Chapter 11, Lancelin and Cassian travel toward the Forge, with Lancelin uncertain about how to approach Weimar Ironfall. Upon reaching the city, Lancelin faces a tense encounter with Blackshields before Weimar greets them warmly. Weimar, dressed in resplendent armor, reveals his plans to go to war against the Ministry and introduces Frontier Marshal Cuggan Terswell, who has brought his battalion and artificers to strengthen the forge. Weimar's niece, Zoria, a skilled fighter, challenges Lancelin, but he is not convinced by her impetuous nature. Lancelin suggests that the better strategy is to join forces with Lady Rosamond at Wyke before attacking the anvil, but Weimar insists on the forge's impregnable position. Eventually, Weimar agrees to join Lancelin and head to Wyke, planning to consolidate forces before taking on the Ministry. The chapter ends with Weimar proposing a celebratory feast before their next move. In Chapter 12, Ansel, a knight of the Draconate, reflects on his past actions, including the murder of the Emperor. He seeks solace in prayer with his fellow knights in the Sanctum of Drakes, a sacred space within the Mount. Interrupted by a legate, Ansel is summoned to a meeting with Archlegate Sancton. The meeting is held in a war room with key figures, including Prince Lorenz, Marshals Tarjan and Serona, and guild leaders. Sancton speaks of their victory and plans for the future, dismissing concerns about the Hallow Hills and the economy. His decree to dismantle Torwyn's artifice, though met with resistance, is enforced through violence when Ansel physically intimidates Reardon. After the meeting, Lady Dorina, Sancton's mother, voices concerns, but Sancton insists on pushing forward with his vision. Ansel reflects on his role in enforcing Sancton's will and the looming challenges ahead. In Chapter 13, Kira arrives late in the anvil under the influence of the Red Drop. As she takes in the city, she notices strange activity, workers dismantling machinery, and a somber atmosphere. She and her companions witness a brutal public execution of war eagles, symbolizing the fall of the guilds and their artifice. Kara meets Ulstrom, who informs her that Sancton is waiting for her at the guild hall. Inside, she finds Sancton dismissing her concerns about the destruction of artifice and her guild's future. He makes it clear that the Hallow Hills will have a role as long as they remain useful, but warns of dire consequences for betrayal. Kara realizes she may have made a grave mistake in aligning with Sancton and the Ministry. After the meeting, she tells her companions that they must bide their time and wait for an opportunity to act, as their future remains uncertain under Sancton's rule. In Chapter 14, Lancelin awakens in the forge, contemplating the gift from Cassian and his purpose in Torwyn's unrest. As Lancelin prepares to leave for Wyke, Cassian warns him that the Griffin Battalion is abandoning their cause. Lancelin confronts Frontier Marshal Terswell, who refuses to support the guilds, fearing the Ministry's overwhelming force. Disappointed, Lancelin resolves to continue without them. Weimar Ironfall vows to fight alongside them, and Lancelin addresses the Black Shields, inspiring them with Weimar's speech. However, Lancelin notices an artificer tampering with explosives in the refinery. He chases her through the forge, discovering that charges are planted throughout the facility. As a massive explosion devastates the forge, Lancelin and Cassian narrowly escape, finding themselves trapped outside by the Griffin Battalion. Just as they face imminent death, Zoria Ironfall rescues them, dispatching the remaining troopers. The group flees the destruction, narrowly escaping the chaos engulfing the forge. In Chapter 15, Connell endures grueling daily training and isolation in a prisoner camp, haunted by memories of his past. He observes the harsh conditions and the mental manipulation by Arcturus, questioning whether he will eventually succumb to their ways. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, Connell finds solace in brief interactions with Nelia, who remains stoic but opens up slightly. Tensions rise when Orsicon, a brutal instructor, punishes an old thrall in front of the prisoners, pushing Connell to defy him. Connell's challenge leads to a violent encounter, and though he considers fleeing, Nelia suggests that escape is impossible. However, Connell, now determined to break free, forms an alliance with Nelia and McCall, a fellow prisoner, to escape the madhouse. They begin to plan their escape, united by the desire for freedom, even as the oppressive music and constant surveillance continue to break their spirits. In Chapter 16, Ansel faces another humiliating task as he waits outside a woman's bedchamber while Sancton takes his pleasure. He reflects on his role as Knight Commander and his obedience to the Archlegate. He is interrupted by Grace, a child who asks innocent yet challenging questions, forcing Ansel to question his life choices. As Ansel interacts with Grace, he is reminded of his guilt over the killing of Jessamine, which he is now complicit in, despite his lack of direct involvement. When Jessamine's death is revealed, Ansel is ordered by Sancton to take Grace and keep her quiet. As Ansel takes the girl through the city, he struggles with his own guilt and the lies he tells her to calm her. Eventually, he leaves Grace in the Mount's kitchens, relieved that his duty is over, but anticipating the next more dangerous task Sancton will assign to him. In Chapter 17, Tiretta and her group journey southward, facing numerous challenges including dwindling supplies and the threat of enemy patrols. As they travel, Tiretta grows increasingly concerned about their mission and whether Nikos Marigo will be there to help. Tensions rise as Donan struggles with his new prosthetic leg, though Kren's craftsmanship provides some comfort. When they encounter a potential Armiger patrol, Tiretta decides to take a detour toward a nearby barge station. Using her newfound connection with Cat, the panther, Tiretta scouts ahead, experiencing the world through the animal's senses. She confirms that the station is abandoned and leads her group there. With the barge in sight, Kren takes charge of navigating it, while Tiretta is left to grapple with the strange changes happening within her. Despite the group's growing concerns, they press forward, unsure of what dangers lie ahead. In Chapter 18, Rosamond, stationed in the southern Eyrie, faces the grim reality of her guild's loss. She discusses strategies with her loyal followers, including Ianto, Fiza, and Kren, about how to approach the Ursus battalion guarding Wyke. Despite having civilian support, the numbers are insufficient to face the trained Armiger force, and Rosamond contemplates a direct confrontation. Fiza reports that the Ursus have shored up defenses, but with stealth they could breach the city. Rosamond considers negotiating with the Ursus Marshal, but Ianto warns against it. The arrival of Alexic Marlock and his son Boris signals a shift. Alexic reveals that the miners of the Marlock Guild, spurred by a call to arms, are marching north to support Rosamond. Rosamond, though hesitant, agrees to lead this makeshift army into battle, knowing that waiting would only strengthen the Ministry's hold. She prepares for the battle that will determine the fate of Wyke and the guilds. In Chapter 19, Kara reflects on the changes happening in Torwyn, particularly in the reconstruction of the city. The Bridge of Saints and Archwind Palace, once symbols of the guilds, are being rebuilt under Sancton's vision, erasing the old order and replacing it with symbols of the worms. Kara, overseeing the work, feels alienated from the process, despite the authority it gives her. She struggles with the loss of the guild's power and the slow erosion of her status. In the palace, she encounters Lawrence, who shares his disillusionment with the new regime, revealing his personal struggles after betraying his father. Their conversation highlights the sacrifices made for change, but Kara senses a lack of true conviction in his words. She vows not to end up like him, a hollow figure lost in the consequences of his choices. Kara realizes that the transformation of Torwyn is inevitable, and she must act quickly to secure her future. In Chapter 20, Ansel is forced to carry out painful interrogations under Sancton's orders, torturing a prisoner for information about a failed uprising. Despite his role, Ansel struggles with guilt, feeling like a betrayer of his own values. The prisoner, resolute even in pain, refuses to name his comrades and speaks of the struggles of ordinary people against Sancton's oppressive regime. Ansel, conflicted by his duty and his conscience, ends the man's suffering with a blow. Later, Ansel checks on Grace, the orphan he feels responsible for. In their brief interaction, she gives him a small beaded bracelet which he feels both guilty and grateful for. As he reflects on his actions, Ansel questions Sancton's leadership and his own loyalty to him. When Regenwolf, his fellow knight, questions Ansel's doubts, he gives the expected answer, but deep down he is unsure of the path he is following. In Chapter 21, Connell, Nylia, and Mikal attempt to escape from Arcturus. They stealthily make their way through the maze-like corridors of the complex, eventually disguising themselves as thralls to avoid detection. After blending in with the workers in the kitchen, they manage to sneak into a wagon, hoping to escape the compound. However, their luck runs out when the wagon returns to the very courtyard they were trying to flee. They are quickly surrounded by overseers and confronted by Wormavin Orsicon, who threatens them with violence. Just as Connell is about to face a brutal beating, Bainra Mokhtar intervenes and informs him that they are to be inducted into an unknown purpose. The chapter ends with Connell chained to a slab in a dark chamber, where he hears an eerie voice offering him power, and is coerced into considering betrayal and the promise of legendary status. In Chapter 22, Tiretta and her group, having stolen a boat, travel south along the river. Tension builds as they approach the rock, where they spot a corpse hung in a tree with the word "Heretic" scrawled on a plaque. They also see smoke rising from the rock, signaling its destruction. They reach a jetty and begin moving toward an underground transport station, but Tyretta senses danger ahead. Using her powers, she observes Auroch Battalion troops and a revocator, including a sniper in a tower. She uses a red pyrestone-tipped arrow to kill the sniper, allowing them to approach the quarry unnoticed. However, they are soon spotted, and Tyretta's group rushes to the transport terminal. A confrontation with armed troopers follows, but Tyretta uses her pyrestone powers to cause explosions, clearing their path. Kren starts the transport, and they narrowly escape as they head toward Windstone. In Chapter 23, Ansel stands with his fellow Drakes to control a growing mob of angry citizens in the burrows. The crowd, protesting for food and work, hurls stones, but Ansel's group holds firm, with tensions rising among the revocators behind him. The situation becomes more precarious as the crowd's anger intensifies. Ansel intervenes when the revocator captain orders the use of force, asserting his authority by invoking orders from the Archlegate. Before violence can break out, the Archlegate Sanctan steps forward and addresses the crowd with compassion. His words calm the mob, convincing them that change is coming, though some remain skeptical. After the crowd disperses, Sanctan praises the Drakes for their restraint, but Ansel feels conflicted. Despite Sanctan's promises of a better future, Ansel harbors doubts about the Archlegate's true intentions and the future of the burrows. In Chapter 24, Kara is frustrated with her current situation, stuck in a crumbling building, waiting for victory and the promised rewards from Sanctan. She is growing restless as the Archlegate continues to tighten his grip on power. Kara's father's fall has left the Hallow Hills in a weakened position, and Kara sees Sanctan's rise as a threat to her guild's future. When a High Legate, Hisolda, arrives with a mission from Sanctan, Kara is both resentful and intrigued. The Archlegate wants Kara to find an artificer, Nikosa Marigot, who could potentially render the guild's powers useless. Hisolda reveals that Tyretta Hawkspur is searching for Marigot, and Sanctan wants Kara to capture her. Though initially unwilling, Kara realizes this mission could provide leverage in the ongoing power struggle. She prepares for the task, begrudgingly accepting her role as a pawn in Sanctan's plans. In Chapter 25, Rosamond surveys Wyke from a ridge, noting the eerie silence and emptiness of the city. Despite having prepared for a battle, she is met with an unexpected development. The Ursus Battalion is withdrawing under orders from Marshal Serona. Captain Ulton, a young officer, explains that the Marshal may have reconsidered her loyalties. Rosamond allows the retreat, though she remains cautious. As Rosamond and her forces enter Wyke, the people begin to emerge from hiding, celebrating their liberation. However, her relief is short-lived as she receives word of a betrayal. The dam holding back the River Tane collapses, flooding the city, and Rosamond is forced to flee. As her group attempts to escape, Ursus soldiers ambush them, leading to a violent confrontation. Ultimately, Rosamond is captured and taken towards Sanctan at the Anvil, realizing her hopes of reclaiming power are slipping away. In Chapter 26, Lancelin rushes to Wyke, desperate to warn Rosamond of the impending danger after the dam collapses. As he races through the city, the flood devastates everything in its path, and he pushes on, determined to reach her. Upon reaching the Hollow, he discovers that the Ursus Battalion is already inside. Despite a violent confrontation with the troopers, Lancelin manages to fight his way through, only to find Rosamond being taken away. He battles through more soldiers, but his wounds slow him down. As he reaches Rosamond, he's fatally shot by a splint bolt. Just as he succumbs to his injuries, Olexig kills the trooper responsible, but Lancelin dies in Rosamond's arms. She holds him as he passes, his final moments filled with love for her, despite the tragedy unfolding around them. In Chapter 27, Connell, tortured and alone, struggles with his fear and growing despair in his dark prison. Nylia arrives, seemingly transformed, with a red pyrestone in her eye. She tries to convince him to accept a gift of greatness and join her, but he refuses. Despite his resistance, she drags him to a cavern where he's strapped to a stone slab by robed figures. Connell is subjected to horrific pain as a tentacle inserts a red pyrestone into his empty eye socket, granting him sight, but at a great cost. As he lies broken, the voice tormenting him urges him to accept the sword placed before him. Initially resisting, Connell ultimately takes the sword, feeling an overwhelming power course through him. However, he remains defiant, unwilling to surrender to the forces controlling him, and he vows to hold on to his identity despite the overwhelming changes. In Chapter 28, Ansel struggles with his decision to leave the Drakes and his life of service. He secretly prepares to abandon his post and live as a traveler, but before leaving, he says his goodbye to Grace. She is confused and saddened by his departure, but he assures her he will return. However, just as he prepares to leave the mount, a group of intruders enters the yard intent on kidnapping Grace. Ansel steps in to protect her, but is stabbed by Patrice the cook and overpowered. Despite his injuries, he struggles to stop the kidnappers, but is too weak to fight them off. Grace is taken, and Joey attempts to intervene, but is knocked unconscious. As the kidnappers escape, Ansel, wounded and unable to move, watches helplessly as Grace is taken from him. In Chapter 29, Rosamund, devastated by the loss of Lancelin, reflects on the destruction of Wyke and the lives lost in the flood. She mourns him alone, feeling the weight of grief while preparing for the next battle. After setting Lancelin's pyre aflame, she discusses the situation with Ianto and Oleksig. News arrives about the ongoing advance of the Ursus Battalion, and the threat of betrayal by allies like Faiza becomes evident. Rosamund's determination to continue the fight grows despite the overwhelming loss. Cassian Main, her father's former swordwright, steps forward, offering his assistance in leading the army. After a tense exchange, Rosamund reluctantly agrees to trust him. She orders a march toward Oakhelm, prioritizing speed and resolve over fortifying the ruined city of Wyke. As she steels herself for the next phase of the war, Rosamund vows to honor Lancelin by continuing the fight. In Chapter 30, Verlin reflects on the farm she and Ash have built, but her worries about the future persist. As the Ministry's influence grows, she fears the looming threat to their peaceful life. Verlin checks on a boy they saved from the lake who has suffered severe injuries. Though Ash is hopeful, Verlin senses something darker at play, especially after a strange vision she experiences when the boy grasps her wrist. His unsettling power and the mysterious symbols on his body trouble Verlin, but Ash insists on caring for him. The boy, named Fulrin, is confused and unable to remember much, asking only about the ongoing conflict. Despite Verlin's reservations, Ash decides to keep him at the farm, but Verlin feels uneasy about the potential dangers he may bring. She reluctantly agrees, knowing trouble is coming, but is uncertain of Fulrin's true nature. Part 2. A Legacy of Hate. In Chapter 31, Connell is trapped in a cell, struggling with his physical and mental torment after being mutilated and forced to accept a powerful jewel in his skull. As he eats like an animal, he's watched by Orsicon the warlord and Nilia, who offers him a drink. Though he resists, Connell begins to understand he's being manipulated into accepting his fate, pressured to give in to the power within him. Orsicon taunts him, offering him a sword and suggesting he join their cause, but Connell refuses. He is then taken to a cavernous ziggurat, where an ancient woman, Senmanthus, reveals her true monstrous form and demands Connell kill his mother to secure his place in her plans. As Connell resists, he is warned of the trials awaiting him in the drift, where he'll be forced to rely on the power inside him. He vows to maintain control of his fate, despite the impending trials. In Chapter 32, Tiretta and her group navigate through Windstone's underground tunnels, emerging in a stinking dump at the city's edge. They make their way through the filth to find Nikos, a former artificer, who might hold the key to stopping the Ministry's war on artifice. After an unhelpful first encounter, Nikos reluctantly agrees to help when Tiretta points out that his former enemies, the Hallow Hills, pose a significant threat. Nikos reveals his work on nullification artifice, which can block the power of webwaners. With his help, they plan to turn the tide of the conflict. Donan secures a way out of the city via a functional landship engine, but tensions rise as they make their way through Windstone. At the maintenance yard, they encounter 2 drakes and a Hallow Hill webwaner. Tiretta warns her group to run as they are confronted, the tension escalating to a deadly standoff. In Chapter 33, Kara watches Tiretta fiercely battle drakes with her Pyrestone-infused spear. While Tiretta fights, Kara pursues the group, determined to find the artificer Nikos and prove her guild's worth. They are ambushed by a woman with a splint bow, but Hessa saves the day with a makeshift Infernium-powered welder. As they chase the fleeing group, a dangerous beast attacks, severely injuring Ulger. Kara reluctantly leaves him behind to pursue their target. The group reaches a landship, but Tiretta and her companions manage to evade capture despite Kara's efforts. Kara is thrown into chaos when an explosion blasts her into the next carriage, further impeding her pursuit. She later returns to Ulger's body, secretly takes a vial of red drops from his pocket and expresses her frustration with the escalating danger. She and Isolde discuss the mission's stakes as they prepare to continue to Castletaig. In Chapter 34, Rosamund leads her group through the Alderwood toward Oakhelm, uncertain of what awaits. After receiving word that a child has been kidnapped by Guild loyalists, Rosamund rejects using the child as leverage against Sancton, opting for mercy. As they approach Oakhelm, Rosamund meets with Radwinter scouts, including Bakuma, who claims Jarlath remains loyal to the guilds despite not acting in their defense. However, Rosamund suspects betrayal, believing Jarlath is aligning with the Ministry for Power. While contemplating the situation, Cassian suggests that Jarlath's swordwright, Thalius Briscoe, could be a key ally due to his loyalty to him personally. Rosamund decides to proceed to Oakhelm and face Jarlath, determined to see his loyalty tested. She resolves that if he betrays them, the consequences will be dire. The group prepares for the potential danger ahead as they continue their journey toward the city. In Chapter 35, Connell and his group, led by Orsicon, traverse the barren drift. Connell struggles with the cursed eye implanted in him and the weight of a demon blade he is forced to carry. The group hunts down a caravan, and despite his reluctance, Connell is swept into the violence. His companions, driven by madness, slaughter the caravan's guards and beasts with brutal zeal. Though Connell fights back the urge to participate, he is reluctantly drawn into the fray, killing one of the guards in self-defense. As the bloodshed subsides, Connell realizes the senselessness of the act and the disturbing joy his companions take in the carnage. Orsicon praises their victory, urging them to embrace their new nature as children of Senmonthus. Connell feels disconnected from his actions and the group's madness, but thanks Nylia for saving his life. She tells him to accept his fate, leaving him to reflect on his grim future. In Chapter 36, Fulren battles despair and isolation, struggling with his physical and emotional trauma after losing his limbs. He's haunted by a whisper, uncertain whether it's a threat or a sign of his deteriorating state. He reflects on his lost life, hoping for release, but realizing he can't die in his helpless condition. When a woman named Ash enters, she and Verlin, a webwainer, tend to him. They offer care and try to make him comfortable, though Verlin remains cautious around him. Ash shares her past as an artificer, and Fulren expresses interest in her work despite his condition. As they move him outside to the porch for fresh air, Fulren senses the presence of Pyrestone nearby. Eventually, they bring him to Ash's workshop, where he's surrounded by the familiar tools of his trade. Despite his limitations, Fulren finds new hope in the possibility of returning to work, signaling his resolve to move forward. In Chapter 37, Ansel struggles with his painful recovery from a wound, reflecting on his regrets and his failure to protect Grace. He grapples with feelings of anger and guilt, especially after recalling the ambush that nearly killed him. Regenwulf, his fellow knight of the Draconate, checks on him, but Ansel lies about his mission to avoid revealing his inner turmoil. When Sancton arrives, Ansel is ordered to stay close and serve him, but Ansel grows increasingly suspicious of Sancton's true intentions regarding Grace's abduction. Ulstrom Garner, a consul loyal to Sancton, is summoned to speak with Ansel and reveals his own fears about defying Sancton. Ansel forces Ulstrom to agree to help him find Grace, promising to protect his family in return. Ulstrom reluctantly agrees, and the chapter ends with Ansel making another vow, burdened by yet another promise he must keep. In Chapter 38, Connell wakes in the drift, haunted by memories of a grotesque orgy in his dreams. He is repulsed by his current life, but seeks freedom, desperate to escape the control of Senmonthus and Orsicon. After a tense moment of contemplation, Connell steals away from the camp, determined to flee despite the voice in his head urging him to submit. As he runs through the drift, he reflects on his past and his broken family. He eventually reaches a crumbling tower, where he removes the Pyrestone from his eye, freeing himself from its grip. Connell confronts Orsicon, killing him in a surge of defiance. With the warlord dead, Connell believes he is finally free, but his escape is blocked by Nylia. She reveals the depth of her own torment, urging him to run. Despite her plea, Connell leaves, knowing he cannot remain and risking his own salvation. In Chapter 39, Rosamund and her group arrive at Oakhelm to meet Jarlath Radwinter, but they are kept waiting in a grotesque mock throne room. Jarlath eventually appears, with his wife Mincloth and the swordwright Thalius Briscoe. Tensions rise as Rosamund grows suspicious of Jarlath's intentions. He reveals that he has made a deal with Sancton, choosing to align with the Ministry for the sake of survival, which infuriates Rosamond. When her nephew Lawrence enters, wearing Archwind red, it becomes clear Jarlath has betrayed the guilds. As Jarlath defends his actions, Rosamond orders his death. Thalius swiftly executes Jarlath, and the guild's men are killed in the ensuing battle. Lawrence is spared, but warned not to cross her again. Rosamond leaves the throne room, her suspicions about Cassian's loyalty eased. The chapter ends with her walking away from the bloodied scene, reaffirming her resolve. In Chapter 40, Fulren struggles with his new mechanical contraption designed to help him walk after losing his limbs. Despite the challenges, he manages a few steps, but frustration and anger overwhelm him when he falls. As he battles with his limitations, he hears the voice of the necroglyph in his head, tempting him to accept its power and end his suffering. Fulren resists, but feels the overwhelming pull of the offer. Ash and Verlin, who have been helping him, continue to support him, with Ash working on creating a device to help him see again. When the helmet is placed on his head, Fulren begins to see clearly for the first time in a while, but the voice grows louder, trying to take control. After the device is removed, Verlin is disturbed by the voice, and Fulren feels guilty for potentially putting her in danger. He grapples with the haunting voice, unsure of his next steps. In Chapter 41, Connell continues his journey through the Drift, seeking to reach home. After a grueling trek, he finds a ruined city and a well with contaminated water, which he drinks to stave off thirst. He takes shelter in a seemingly abandoned tower, where he is haunted by the voice of the demon sword, warning him of danger. As night falls, Connell notices figures lurking in the shadows, eventually realizing they are hostile creatures. He fends them off with a makeshift torch, but when it goes out, the creatures swarm him. In desperation, Connell finally succumbs to the sword's control, using it to brutally fight off the attackers. As the creatures retreat, he escapes into the night, no longer pursued. The chapter highlights Connell's physical and psychological struggles, as well as his increasing reliance on the sword's power to survive. In Chapter 42, Tyretta and her group travel toward Kessel Teg, where Tyretta hopes to complete her mission. Upon nearing the city, she realizes the Ministry has attacked, with artillery blasting and smoke rising. She uses her powers to scout the situation, learning that the Viper Battalion controls the southern half of the city, and they must risk going through it to reach the northern terminal. After a confrontation with the Viper troopers, Tyretta is allowed to proceed, and they navigate the devastated streets filled with carnage. The Viper captain, Mairead, explains that the guild's reinforcements have been delayed and the city is on the brink of collapse. Tyretta learns that Wyke has been destroyed by a sabotaged dam, and her mother is missing. Despite the overwhelming danger, Tyretta resolves to complete her mission, determined to find a way to continue the fight against the Ministry. In Chapter 43, Kara and her group arrive in the war-torn city of Kessel Teg, seeking to track down Tyretta Hawkspur and the artificer she's traveling with. Kara reflects on her failures and the sacrifices made, particularly the loss of Ulger. After meeting with Marshal Tarion, who leads the Phoenix Battalion, Kara learns that a landship had docked earlier, and she believes Tyretta may have crossed the river. However, Tarion is reluctant to provide more than a small contingent of troopers, as his resources are stretched thin due to the ongoing war. Kara, desperate to find Tyretta, is given access to the city's armory, where she and Hessa pick up useful weapons, including a Volt gun and a Stormhulk, a powerful war machine. With these new tools, they prepare to pursue their quarry, aware that time is running out. The Battle of Oakhelm. In the Battle of Oakhelm, Eldred leads an assault with Stormhulks against Oakhelm's western gate, demolishing it with Pyrestone-powered weapons. The Hallowhill Guild sisters advance, smashing through the defenses, only to encounter a surprising force, the Marlock Guild miners, who had expected protection from the city walls. Despite their lack of military experience, the miners try to defend themselves but are quickly overwhelmed by the Stormhulk's fiery onslaught. As the battle intensifies, Eldred's Stormhulk falls into a trap, detonating Pyrestone charges beneath them, causing massive destruction. Filbert Carrick, an artificer, plants a Pyrestone explosive, taking out the Stormhulks but also witnessing the brutal aftermath. Meanwhile, Ianto, tasked with protecting Rosamond, faces ambush by Drake's and Corvus troops. After a fierce struggle, he leads Rosamond to a mill, where Lorenz and a Drake confront them. Despite Loren's attempt to strike a deal, Ianto sacrifices himself to ensure Rosamond's escape. Ultimately, Rosamund's forces defeat the enemy, securing victory. In Chapter 44, Fulren struggles to regain his balance and independence, using a pneumatic rig after losing one arm and his sight. Despite his frustrations, he makes progress with help from Ashe and Verlin, who encourage him to keep going. Ashe, however, insists on trying a Pyrestone helmet again, hoping it will improve his movement. Fulren is reluctant, fearing the helmet's dark power, but ultimately agrees. As Revocators arrive, demanding the dismantling of their unsanctioned artifice, tension escalates. Verlin's defiance leads to violence, and Fulren, enraged by the harm done to Ashe and Verlin, finally dons the helmet. Empowered by the Necroglyph's power, Fulren stands and fights, swiftly and expertly killing the Revocators. After the battle, the intense pain and the force of the helmet's power overwhelm him, and he collapses just as Verlin approaches, calling his name. In Chapter 45, Teretta and her group navigate the ruined streets near the northern riverbank, trying to reach a landship terminal. As they move through the dark, Teretta's heightened senses detect danger. Suddenly, they are attacked by a powerful Stormhulk, which Teretta narrowly avoids. She uses her emerging abilities to destroy the machine, only to be confronted by a woman from Windstone, who is eventually overpowered. Just as Teretta prepares to deliver a fatal blow, another Webwainer with a Volt gun strikes, knocking Teretta unconscious. As Teretta recovers, she feels the loss of Kren, who is fatally wounded by a Webwainer. Fueled by rage, Teretta hunts down her adversary but finds herself caught in a trap set by a powerful Webwainer, Kara Hollowhill. Teretta narrowly avoids death, overpowering Kara, but ultimately spares her life. As she escapes, Teretta is ambushed by Phoenix Battalion troops and captured, ending her attempt to escape the Ministry's grasp. In Chapter 46, Ansel, disguised as a beggar, waits in the burrows to find Grace, following a lead provided by Ulstrom. After observing cloaked figures visiting a suspicious house, Ansel confirms it is the right place when he sees the cook, Patris, arriving. Despite the risks and his previous sins, Ansel decides to act. He confronts the occupants of the house, fighting through resistance and killing several people to reach Grace. When he finds her, Patris holds a knife to her throat, but Ansel convinces him to release her by swearing an oath. After retrieving Grace, Ansel kills Patris and others, reflecting on his past and feeling the weight of his wounds. Grace, unharmed, expresses no fear and asks if their adventure is just beginning. As Ansel carries her back toward the mount, he contemplates the consequences of his actions and wonders if he should start a new life with her. In Chapter 47, Kara, scarred and weary, oversees Teretta and Nikasa, the prisoners she captured. She confronts Teretta, mocking her resilience while acknowledging the dangerous rivalry between them. Kara is angered by Teretta's bitterness, but maintains control. She then moves to Nikas, who reveals his brother Lysander could have created world-changing technologies, but avoided power to prevent apocalyptic destruction. Kara is both intrigued and terrified by his words. Isolde arrives, claiming authority over the prisoners and executing Nikas, dismissing Kara's concerns about losing valuable knowledge. Isolde states that Teretta will be used as leverage against Lady Rosamund's resistance. Kara, realizing her usefulness is waning, decides to take action. She speaks with Hessa, planning a renegotiation of terms, realizing that once the Ministry secures Teretta, they'll no longer need the Hollow Hills. Kara aims to resolve the looming problem, with Hessa reluctantly agreeing to help. In Chapter 48, Fulren Hawkspur struggles with the torment of his inner demon while trapped in a labyrinth of steel and machinery, where he undergoes painful transformations. Despite the agony and the voice offering salvation, Fulren fights to maintain control. After managing to escape the infernal machine, he crawls outside to find Verlin, who has been mourning Ash's death. Verlin helps Fulren to a chair and pushes him to a gravesite, where Ashe is buried. She insists on helping Fulren, even though it may put her in danger, and suggests finding an old friend who might know how to stop his torment. Fulren, despite his doubts, agrees. The two leave, and Verlin burns down the farmhouse, symbolizing her commitment to fighting the Ministry. Fulren, still overwhelmed by his power, contemplates his uncertain future as they embark on their journey, hoping that the man Verlin mentioned can offer him a way out. In Chapter 49, Teretta is imprisoned and struggling with grief over the deaths of Nikose and Kren, as well as her role in their deaths. Kara Hollowhill visits, offering Teretta a chance to escape if she leaves the city immediately. Despite her distrust, Teretta reluctantly agrees, but demands her panther be freed. Kara, however, insists Teretta leave Cat behind for safety. After escaping the jail, Tyretta meets her freed friends, Stead and Donan, and they head toward a landship terminal, but Tyretta is tormented by the loss of Cat. As they reach the terminal, Tyretta decides to go back for her panther, even if it means risking her life. She sneaks into the jail, kills a trooper, and frees Cat, but is confronted by two drakes. Despite her ferocity, Tyretta is overpowered, and the chapter ends with her struggling for air, her life in jeopardy. In Chapter 50, Kira Hollowhill reflects on the mess she's in, dealing with dead troopers, Tyretta in chains, and the looming consequences of her actions. She meets with Isolde and Ulstrom Garner at a Corwin embassy where tensions rise over the fate of Tyretta. Isolde insists on burning Tyretta to eliminate her dangerous sorceress powers, while Ulstrom argues Tyretta could be valuable in ending Rosamund Hawkspur's resistance. Kira tries to resist but is powerless against Isolde's command. In a moment of desperation, Kira kills Isolde with a knife, knowing the act seals her fate. Ulstrom, witnessing the murder, offers a deal, suggesting that Kira could broker a deal with Rosamund using Tyretta as leverage. Despite her initial distrust, Kira considers his offer. She is soon apprehended by Drakes, but is left uncertain about Ulstrom's true loyalty, realizing her struggle for survival is far from over. In Chapter 51, Connell, weakened by thirst and fatigue, stumbles through a desolate landscape until he encounters a city. Despite its grim nature, he finds a momentary relief in the bustling streets. He struggles with his thirst, but the tavern keeper refuses to give him water without trade. After contemplating surrendering his sword, Connell is unexpectedly offered water by Nelia, who appears to have her own motives. She taunts him about his past connection to Senmonthus and the inevitable power he will eventually submit to. Connell resists, determined to retain control, but Nelia warns that he cannot escape the demon's hold. McCall, her companion, watches from afar. When Connell tries to escape, he inadvertently kills McCall in the process. Connell faces Nelia in a brutal fight, but overwhelmed by guilt, he chooses not to kill her. Instead, he discards his sword and flees, hoping to escape the influence of Senmonthus. In Chapter 52, Rosamund wakes in Jarlath's tower after a hard-won victory, reflecting on the losses and the cost of war. She prepares for the day ahead, wearing her Hawkspur blue despite warnings. With Ianto by her side, they leave the tower and witness the aftermath of the battle, including the devastation and mass graves. Rosamund meets with Magar Ironfall, discussing the need to strengthen Oakhelm before moving on to the Anvil. She later oversees the execution of Ursus Battalion prisoners, condemning them to die by drowning in the lock chamber as punishment for their actions. Fiza, a traitor who betrayed Wyke, pleads for mercy but is cast into the flood. Rosamund faces her nephew, Lorenz, who defies her demands to abandon the Draconate. In a brutal act, she orders his hand to be severed, showing her ruthless resolve. She vows to continue her fight against Sancton, becoming the Hawkspur everyone fears. In Chapter 53, Kira, trapped in a tower, reflects on her failed mission and her bleak future. The Armigers are advancing, and Kira feels the weight of her predicament, trapped between the guilds and her father's expectations. Ulstrom visits her, offering cryptic answers about her fate. He reveals that Tyretta Hawkspur is being sent to the Anvil, but Kira's execution is delayed due to political concerns. Ulstrom proposes an unlikely alliance, asking Kira to help prevent Tyretta's journey and bring her to her mother instead. Kira is skeptical but intrigued, sensing his desperation. He admits to past lies, but now seeks her trust, offering her daggers with pyrostones replaced. Despite her reservations, Kira agrees to cooperate, and they form an uneasy pact, acknowledging their mutual need. In Chapter 54, Ansel, imprisoned and wounded, reflects on his fate, unsure whether his disobedience to the Archlegate will lead to execution or exile. Despite his injuries, he takes solace in having saved Grace, though he remains concerned about her safety. When his brothers, Falkar and Regenwulf, arrive, they express their support, but Ansel knows that his fate lies in the hands of the Archlegate. The two brothers accompany him to face Sanctan, who questions Ansel's defiance. Ansel defends his actions, explaining that he acted to save Grace, but Sanctan rebukes him, revealing his anger over the consequences of Ansel's interference. Just as tensions rise, Prince Lorenz enters, reporting the guild's strength at Oakhelm. Sanctan, barely maintaining his composure, offers Ansel a chance at redemption. Afterward, Ansel finds Grace waiting for him in his chamber, offering him simple comfort, and they share a quiet moment of reflection. In Chapter 55, Tyretta, locked in chains and transported in a landship, feels powerless and resigned to her fate. She witnesses Kat's struggle in a cage and attempts to calm her, but the situation worsens when Ulstrom appears, suggesting that Tyretta will not reach the anvil as planned. Tyretta is confused by his cryptic message but doesn't trust him. As the landship moves, Tyretta attempts to reach out through her powers, but is blocked by the Drake's strong will. The ship suddenly halts, and an explosion rocks the carriage. Kara Hollowhill appears with a group of webwainers, revealing that Tyretta will not be going to her mother, but instead to the web. Kara explains that Ulstrom's plan was altered, and Tyretta is drugged with a powerful narcotic to ensure she remains subdued. As the drug takes effect, Tyretta falls into a distorted, drug-induced haze, unsure of what's to come. In Chapter 56, Fulren and Verlin continue their journey, traveling toward Lysander Marigote's home. Fulren struggles with his physical limitations, feeling the weight of his blindness and loss of limbs. Verlin hints at Lysander's dark past as a sorcerer, but Fulren has no choice but to trust him, given the urgency of his situation. Upon arriving at Lysander's home, Fulren is confronted by the unsettling atmosphere and Lysander's ambiguous intentions. Verlin reveals Fulren's necroglyph, which intrigues Lysander, though he initially dismisses Fulren's abilities. After examining Fulren's marking, Lysander shares that necroglyphs can both empower and curse their bearer, and he hints at his own experiences with similar dark magic. Lysander promises to help Fulren regain his strength and control over his powers, despite the danger. The chapter ends with Lysander's ominous assurance that Fulren will fight again, despite his current limitations. In Chapter 57, Kara walks through the decaying web, reflecting on her city's state and the path ahead. She arrives at the Hollowhill Manse, where she encounters her father, Ingelram, who mocks her and questions her loyalty. Kara, now clear-headed after giving up the red drop, asserts that she is taking control of the guild and intends to use Tyretta Hawkspur as leverage to force a truce with Lady Rosamond. She declares that she will unite the guilds and crush Sancton's religious coup. When her father belittles her plans, Kara grows increasingly contemptuous, ultimately attacking him. She uses Pyrestone-infused blades to torture and kill him, demonstrating her power as a true webwainer. After watching her father die in flames, Kara leaves the burning manse, feeling indifferent to its destruction. She steps into the night, marking the beginning of her rise to power as the new leader of the Hallowhills. In Chapter 58, Connell, after surviving the drift, finally reaches Fort Carvin, hoping for safety. He collapses at the gate and is rescued by soldiers who take him inside. Once treated by a surgeon, he learns that many of his mother's forces are still fighting, and Oakhelm has been repelled after a siege. Despite the bad news, Connell is determined to reunite with his mother. As he rests, he wakes to a strange silence in the fort. Upon discovering blood and dead bodies, he encounters Nylia, who has fully succumbed to the demon within her. She threatens him, but in a desperate attempt to help her, Connell is forced to kill her. He is devastated, but his curse remains. The chapter ends with Connell realizing that despite his return to safety, he is still bound to the demon sword and its influence. In Chapter 59, Rosamond surveys Oakhelm, now fortified and ready for war. With her forces gathered, she reflects on her role as leader, feeling both responsibility and trepidation. She plans to march east with her army to confront Sancton, but as they prepare to leave, a webwainer sent by Kara Hollowhill arrives with a threat. Tyretta is in the web, and Kara demands Rosamond's surrender within 5 days. The webwainer presents Tyretta's panther's pelt as proof, intensifying Rosamond's resolve. Despite the obvious trap, Rosamond decides to face Kara, choosing to follow her daughter's captor's instructions rather than risk further harm to Tyretta. She orders Olexig to lead the main army west while she heads to the web alone, determined to secure Tyretta's safety. The chapter ends with Rosamond's unyielding determination to rescue her daughter, setting the stage for an impending confrontation. Epilogue. Bakan, a servant at a Juberan bathhouse, attends to Venice, a powerful arcanist with scars from a mysterious ordeal. He reflects on his role as a spy for House Durador, tasked with gathering secrets from influential patrons like Wennis. During their private session, Wennis and Bakan are interrupted by Amosis Makareth, a webwainer sent by Queen Marisang. Amosis informs Wennis that war is imminent, with the Scions planning to invade Narakis. She reveals that Wennis has been chosen by the Queen for a crucial mission, to seek an alliance with Rosamond Hawkspur, despite the past hostility between them. Bakan overhears the conversation, learning of the Scions' alliance and the dangers ahead. When Emosis discovers Buchan spying, she paralyzes him with a ring's power, leaving him to die in the bath while the women continue their discussion.